Yeah, what I'd like to do is have everybody go ahead and mute themselves so they can maintain control. Because if I mute everybody, things can get a little wonky.
They're going to take
Okay, so for those of you who may not have heard John Ferguson, if you could try to mute yourselves, that would be terrific. So that way we'll minimize any of the background noises for the moment.
And do we want,
if anybody's having a problem doing that, stick it in the chat box, and I think maybe John may be able to mute you.
Yep, and I can go in on that. For those of you that are not on video, will you please mute yourselves as well?
oh, yeah.
Okay, good.
And do we want them to name themselves or not right now?
We can do that now, or we can do that in a moment, Mike.
We'll share that in just a moment. We got a few Zoom housekeeping items. Actually, John, why don't you go ahead and just do your Zoom housekeeping items now? I think that would be helpful, and then we can get into the actual setup for the session.
Sure. So since
Ferguson, he's a fellow at the Patterson Foundation. For those of you who were on our webinar last week, you met John, and if you're new to our series, please say hello to John Ferguson.
Hi, everybody. Good morning. So I can't hear you because you're on mute, hopefully, but I'm really glad you are. But there's just a few things to make this run as smoothly as possible. One thing is everybody has kind of different names or phone numbers involved. So for those of you on video, if you could rename yourselves, and there's two ways to do that. First off, if you scroll down to the bottom of your screen and find the Participants tab, if you click on that and you find your name, go over to More, and if you click on More, there will be an option to rename. And what we'd like you to do is to put your name and the organization that you're representing. That would be very helpful for us to make sure that we manage the conversation appropriately. And as we're doing that, while we're in there, at the bottom of the participants, you should see a way to raise hand. If you find the raise hand button, could you go ahead and raise your hand for me virtually so I can see? Awesome. So many people are getting that right away. Perfect. Just to let you know, that's how we're going to manage questions, is to raise your hand virtually through the participants function. Because it's hard to see, since there's so many people, it's hard to see people actually raising their hand there. And this handy little way actually lets us see in the order in which questions were received. So we're gonna kind of manage it through that way. So in the same way that you could raise your hand, there should now appear a way to lower hand. So if you could go ahead and lower your hand, that would be fantastic. And then as questions are asked, if somebody happens to ask yours or answer yours, if you could lower your hand to take yourself out of the queue, that would be incredibly helpful, and we would very much appreciate it. So everyone knows today's session is being recorded and will be available. So don't feel like you have to scribble down every little last note. You will have access to this later on, so you can just fully be present with us and ask the questions and experience the first ever Webversation to its fullest extent possible. So I know I'm excited. I hope you all are too. And also for those of you that may be a little shy and don't want to ask questions live, you have the option to post questions in the chat box, and I'll be happy to moderate for you in the event that that would be your preference. So I think, Mike, that I've covered everything, and I will turn it back over to you.
That's great. Thank you, John. Well, welcome everybody to our very first Webversation. You again are making history because if you joined us last week for the world's first labinar, you now know that we do like to make up words that are uniquely ours, and we will continue to do so moving forward. Let me start just with some brief introductions. Again, Michael Oxman, one of the managing partners and principals with No Margin, No Mission. And if my partner in crime and colleague up in the box next to me can wave and say hello, that would be a good thing as well.
Hi, everybody.
Larry Clark, the other half of No Margin, No Mission, Also, just briefly, the Patterson Foundation, our friends, our partners, and our colleagues, through their generous support of this advancing mission thrivability work, are here with us today as well. So Deborah Jacobs, Michael Corley, John Ferguson, whom you met, Josephine Eisenberg, and I have seen a couple of others. If you could wave, Stacy Sternberg, communications guru at the Patterson Foundation. Is Hannah here? Hannah is here, who was the inaugural fellow at the Patterson Foundation. And did I miss anybody, since I can't see the whole Patterson Foundation crew? Anybody that I'm missing, John or Josephine or others?
Abby Rowland, our third fellow for TPF, is on the Webversation as well.
Abby Rowland is here with us as well, the newest and the third fellow for the Patterson Foundation. And then, of course, we would love to welcome all of the participants to today's session. If I'm looking and seeing the correct number, we have a total of 56 participants from a variety of organizations around our 4-county area. So again, we are delighted that you are here and joining us today. A number of different types of organizations serving different missions, different populations, and that is what we love. So thanks to all of you for joining us and for coming back for more after last week's webinar. Why are we here today? Well, we're here for a couple of reasons. One is this is a continuation. This is a series of what was originally going to be 3 Zoom sessions that has now been extended to 4. We'll talk about that a little bit more toward the very end, but we want to continue where we left off. And essentially what we're going to be doing today is giving everybody an opportunity to talk more and to continue this conversation about how to strengthen your organization through building that mission-centric impact and looking for ways to just strengthen and make your organizations more thrivable. And through today's Webversation, we're going to be utilizing a bit of a unique format. We wanted to take full advantage of this wonderful Zoom technology, bring all of you together, and create an opportunity to share thoughts, ideas, have some discussion and conversation. So very different from our webinar, which was more us sharing some suggestions, some learning, some knowledge. But today is really going to be more about all of us being able to share and provide some information that we can use in a variety of different ways. We're not professing to arrive with the answers, but we do believe that through today's conversation, that everybody will leave and walk away with some good insight, some understanding, and some nice nuggets of value that will be helpful as we continue through this series. And I think with that, what I'd like to do is, unless anybody has any burning questions or comments, we'll move into sort of the meat of today's Webversation, which is providing some opportunity for questions and answers. We're going to be doing it in a sort of a moderated and facilitated way, but still providing opportunities for conversation and discussion. So with that, I think I'll pass it over to Larry to introduce the Q&A portion of today's Webversation.
Hi, everybody. I just have to say, Stacy Sternberg and Rick Yocum, it looks like you're at exactly the same place on a beach. So I know that's not true, but thank you, Mike. We, first of all, thank everyone for all the questions that you sent in to us. You sent in questions directly by email to us, and then you also put some on your surveys. So we've kind of grouped those questions into a few different categories, and I'll read through those. The first will be Cope, Adapt, and Innovate. There's a few questions there. Mission focus, communications, capacity building, and then there was a couple of HR questions. So we'll kind of walk through this. I'll read the question first, and I believe John is going to put the question up in the chat box, so you'll see it in writing. I'll provide some thoughts about that question, and then we'll open it up and raise your hand, and then via the chat function or the function, the raise your hand function, and then we'll turn it over to you and let you provide some thoughts about whatever the question is. So that's how we'll work. So let's start. I'll read the first one. So can you, and this is again in Cope, Adapt, and Innovate. Can you share how other organizations are coping during this difficult time? So it's a good question. And if you attended last week's webinar, you saw, with Cope, Adapt, and Innovate, most of the organizations are between Adapt and Innovate, which we felt good about. But with everything that's happening now again in Florida, you might be rotating back and going through, Cope, Adapt, and Innovate again, depending on how it's happening. Everyone is doing it differently. So I don't think there's one example to use, and I think all of you have examples. So what I would like to do right now is to open it up, have somebody raise their hand, and just share how are you coping right now with what you're going through. And again, don't have long answers, but somewhat short answers, because we have a lot of questions to get through. So does somebody, John, is somebody raising their hand they want to share? Please don't be afraid.
Not yet.
Wow. Am I gonna have to call on somebody?
Oh, here we have a volunteer now.
Okay.
Brynne, you are on the line.
Oh, thank you, and good to see everybody, and thank you for the opportunity. The bishop opened according to the governor's orders in June, and it's been an interesting experience to first make staff, make a plan and then make staff comfortable to be here at the museum and then to welcome visitors. And we've learned a lot along the way. I think that the whole process has brought our team closer together. And we've had some good feedback on creating a one-way experience in the museum, and people feel safe, and that's everybody feels good about that. So, but we did it as a slow roll. We didn't immediately jump into it, and listen to everybody, because many minds make it better. But it's been a real good team building experience. Not fun, not great. We're not getting the visitation we'd like to have. We've pivoted and we did online, but you can't monetize that in the same way as in-person experience that we're built for. So we have to look at the future and figure out our direction and how we can be sustainable.
Great, Brynne, thank you for sharing. And I think you're right. I think it's not fun. I don't think anyone is having a lot of fun right now. So when you do, raise your hand, say your name, and say the organization you're representing. That would help us put it into context of where you're going.
We have two more brave volunteers.
Okay.
We have let's go with Danielle from Big Cat Habitat.
Danielle.
Sorry. Okay. Well, for us, I think, Nancy Nallen with Big Cat Habitat. I think for us, how we've coped really just internally is having the animals here. It's kind of slowed us down from, the people and the revenue portion of our business. It's helped us to cope just by being around nature and the animals. We haven't begun to cope financially with what's happening, other than, I'm gonna cry. The giving challenge was so helpful.
Yeah, thank goodness that came. I'm Kay, Big Cat Habitat founder and president. That came at exactly the right time, right when we ran out of our PPE. We got the money from the giving challenge, and what a godsend, because we've been able to keep going now. We haven't really made a public appeal because we don't really want to stress people out and worry about the animals. They're all getting fed. The food is still coming in pretty good portions. We're actually able to help other animal places with our excesses. So we're okay, but we're certainly very concerned for how long this is going to go on. None of us know, and all of us need to know, so we can figure out how we're going to continue to prosper and be okay.
Great. Well, thank you, both of you. And all of us want a lemur on us right now as we're watching it crawl around. And also a big shout out again to the Patterson Foundation for the match for the Giving Challenge, just as you said, Nancy. It came at the right time. So why don't we move on, John? Maybe 2 questions there was good. The second question that I'll take is, what are the best ways to implement new ideas that emerge during the innovation phase of Cope, Adapt, and Innovate? And if, again, I don't want to sound like a broken record, but if you're on our lab last week, you watched us walk through a process of how do you keep mission right in front of you? And I think the best way to implement new ideas is, one, making sure your mission is in front of you and you're having a conversation about that. Trying to meet the needs of your current population. And are there ways to do that that brings that innovation into it? And I shared last week that one organization we're working with, which is the Neuro Challenge in Sarasota, they did 40 in-person trainings, and they converted them within 2 weeks to 40 Zoom trainings, and they're reaching a much greater population than they would have if they would have still done the in-person trainings, because they're reaching people outside of the area now. So that was some innovation that took place. They kept their mission right front and center, and that's one example. So anybody want to share ways to implement new ideas during?
Larry, can I interject one thing just as an
Sure.
add-on to what you said? One thing that we are very big believers in when it comes to implementation of these new ideas is that you really maintain or try to dial up as best you can kind of your entrepreneurial nature. So keeping an open mind, staying nimble, being flexible, and doing things in a way that allow you the permission to keep moving forward. So if as an organization or a team, you've historically had either barriers or systems in place that would slow things down, you may want to rethink those. You may want to bring folks together and figure out ways that you can push them forward. That will help you enormously when you're trying to implement through this innovate stage. So just thought that was an important point to register with everyone.
Great, thanks, Mike. John, anybody have their hand raised?
Yes, let's go over to Diana Shoemaker.
Hi, Diana Shoemaker. I'm with the Manatee Habitat for Humanity. No Margin, No Mission partnership really focused on our restore and was really helpful in getting us stabilized there. During this time, when we started to do the shutdown, our retail manager was already really active on social media and really began to use Facebook to communicate with the community about the products we had to help support our mission in the sale of the products that we have in the restore. And that innovation, which she was doing before and during, really has become an essential part of the work that we're doing right now. And it continues. And what's really exciting about it is that as we have opened up again and slowly opened up, it's brought us new people that we never would have had access to through print media and through, coming in the front door. So it really has expanded for us, the community that we can serve through our mission, through the restore.
Great, thank you, Diana. And Karen on your staff is a true innovator and an entrepreneur. And just as Mike said, look for the entrepreneurs within your organization like her that can help move things forward. Is there one more question or should we move on?
Absolutely, yeah, let's do one more. Let's go with Jennifer Carey from Sarasota Medical.
Hi, everyone. Yes, we found that it was very helpful that we have some innovative staff members, and we had to move immediately to telehealth for the medical care and virtual classes for the education. And the men that we serve, the partners that we have men's support for, they didn't really care so much for the phone call follow-ups that we were giving. So the men's coaches, we have 2 on staff, they actually created videos that they sent out just for the men to have their own network to watch, and we're finding some traction with that. But also, we've had our educational classes triple because all the barriers to getting care were removed, of having to find transportation and daycare. And we also found with telehealth that we went from about, let's say 40 to 50% no-shows to almost zero no-shows, because again, it was so much easier to get on the video and to get care. And we're finding then that we're actually spreading, people are coming in that we would never have seen, so that the care is spreading exponentially because people are enjoying it, and they're finding it so easy to get their friends also to participate, that we are hiring at this point instead of thinking about the other side, the flip side of not being able to hire, thanks to the PPE loan, and then also thanks again to the Giving Challenge and the Patterson Foundation. So we're really seeing a shift that we feel will be permanent, and we're looking forward to seeing where this goes.
Great. That was my question. Was it going to be permanent? So, and I think some organizations are feeling that their innovation has actually created a new business model for them. So good for you. Let's move on to the next question that I have. How can organizations think about evolving to a new and different business model to survive and grow? So I think we just heard one example of how that can happen. Some of you are forced to move into a new business model. Hopefully you're going back and looking at the decisions that you've made over the past 4 months, because the homework we gave you last week, which was to think about those decisions you've made, think about the goals that you had set, and how you made those decisions. Anytime we think about a business model, we always think, if you're going to change something up, what are the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats of whatever that new model might be? And we would encourage you as a team to sit down and look at that SWOT analysis about whatever changes you're considering. And then what risks are associated with those changes? Usually those come out of the threats and the weaknesses. So what risks are there? And can you mitigate those risks if you move forward with that new business model? So, you know, that's a process that Mike and I take organizations through a lot, actually. And I think the last thing I'll share here is seek out organizations that might have that type of business model in place, and find out the good, the bad, and the ugly from them on what's worked, and, you know, what would they have done differently if they switched up the model to be something that you're considering. So those are just some thoughts that I have. Open it up for anybody else have any comments?
I don't see any hands yet.
Okay. Well, why don't we move on? I'll turn it over to Mike.
Okay, thanks, Larry. And it's worth noting that if you don't have a chance to talk or share during today's Webversation, capture your comments in the chat box. We will note those, and if there's anything to follow up with you about or to continue in terms of conversation afterwards, we're certainly happy to do that. So the next question is, if your mission is to gather people and your organization is restricted from doing so, should you wait it out, or should you change up what you're doing moving forward? So it's a great question, and this whole idea that none of us have a crystal ball, nobody knows exactly what's coming, and how long are we into sort of this new COVID world. So just a couple of thoughts to share with you, and then we'll open it up to see if anyone else has any thoughts. But we suggest that you do move forward. As you know, we've been in this, since COVID and the pandemic hit in March. Many of us thought early on we were going to be well beyond it now, and we certainly are not. And it sort of looks like we're going to be into this for the foreseeable future. So unless you as an organization and a team are comfortable and have the wherewithal to wait it out, we do suggest you look for ways to innovate, to morph, to pivot, to change, to do those things that will allow you to keep moving forward in the best possible way. Again, this whole idea of cope, adapt, innovate, and how you move through it are really critical to that process and the thinking that goes into how you keep your organization moving in a productive way. So it's very much in keeping with the conversations that we're having through this series of conversations. Does anybody have anything that they'd like to share in terms of your own thoughts or experiences about wait it out or move this forward in whatever way, you know, makes the most sense for you?
Yeah, Mike, let's start with Roger.
Roger.
Well, Roger Arnholt, Manatee County Habitat for Humanity. One of the core things in our operations is the use of volunteers to do our home construction. And so for a while, we just absolutely shut down. I don't know, it was March and April, and I think it was in May, we began bringing back small groups of volunteers. So there was just this whole thought process of how can we make the work environment as safe as we can for volunteers to come back. It involved procedural things about requirements of our volunteers in terms of wearing masks, temperature checks, and all that kind of stuff. It meant building stations where washing of hands could occur with frequency. Typically in the past, sometimes we didn't have running water available in our work sites, and now we've created that possibility by building these portable stands where that can occur. We had to change how we use volunteers, bringing back more of our consistent, sort of skilled and experienced volunteers in small groups to move the work forward. And the loss is that our casual volunteers was an opportunity to teach people, educate people about our mission, and now that's sort of cut off. I think we're still struggling with that. This morning we were on a conference call planning a dedication for a house that's about to be completed. Typically we try and gather as many people together as we can that's been involved in that construction process. This happened to be in partnership with a number of faith communities. And we decided we'll ask one volunteer from each of those faith communities to come, and we'll attach them to the house by crepe paper ribbons attached to the house so that they can be out in the yard, separated from each other. They can still be involved and be there, but you just got to rethink the whole process. So within the guidelines about how to be safe, just to rethink everything, but it doesn't mean we're going to stop. We move forward in a new kind of way.
Good, good. Well, I think, you know, what you just shared, Roger, is important. And you gave, I think, a good insight, which is something that we talk a lot about at sort of these current times. And that is, how do you sort of meet people where they're at in terms of how they're feeling, what they're experiencing, and using that as a way to springboard the organization and continue the work that you're doing. So I think it's a good point and a good insight. So thank you for sharing that. John, is there any other comments to share here?
Yeah, so there's two more hands up, and I think we probably have time for one. So we're gonna, Rick Yocum is next in line, and Joan, Geyer, if you could move your comment to the chat box in this particular case, that would be super helpful so we can capture that. But Rick, before you start, I just want to call everybody's attention to the chat box. Erin McLeod wrote a really interesting piece there stating that she had, even though they have world-class campuses and spaces for seniors to gather and receive services, they recognize the need to move as much as possible to virtual in the climate today. And now they're seeking to adapt the technology, whether that's a website or whatever it may be, to provide different point of sale options. So I think that's a really powerful way to look at this as well. Rick, turn it over to you.
Rick?
So understanding right from the beginning that there's such a wide variety of apprehensions that people are experiencing as we work through this pandemic. We, as a essential business operated throughout this entire time. One of the things that we tried to do was to kind of normalize the experience here, so that people are comfortable with our curbside check-in or by appointment only in the shelter. You know, my entire staff is wearing masks, everyone social distance, remind clients to social distance. And, you know, that really makes this experience, people feel good about the experience when they bring their animals to our veterinary clinic. On the internal side, in trying to normalize things the best I could for my staff, we've been hard at work on planning and moving forward on several different things. We purchased a property next to us in early April, to expand into that area, our services. We did some construction in our community room and created a permanent vaccine clinic area. We've added a couple of wellness exam rooms. We are in the process of creating a new dental surgical suite. And all of these things have the entire staff involved in the planning and just trying to create, again, a sense of normalcy, because that's what most people miss in their life is the normalcy. And that's what freaks people out. So we're trying to stay focused on expanding and moving forward, including all my staff in these decisions, and it's worked amazingly well. I'm so proud of my staff and how focused they are in providing services to our clients during this most difficult time. And again, we're trying to take advantage of the opportunities that this pandemic has created. So that's kind of our thought process here.
Thank you for sharing that, Rick.
Thank
So I think just again in capsulizing both what Rick and Roger shared, meet your stakeholders where you're at, understand their needs, their wants, their desires, their fears, and then really try to tailor your approach, your offerings to address those needs, those wants, those desires, and those fears. And you'll find that to be quite helpful. So we're going to keep moving. And we've got one more question in this Cope, Adapt, Innovate area. And it came in the form actually of two questions related to attracting volunteers and board members during these challenging times. So question number one was, any suggestions on attracting volunteers and new board members during this pandemic? And I'll start by offering up a few suggestions and thoughts. And they really take the form of, as organizations, as team members within your organization, what are you doing in terms of your outreach, in your communication, in your messaging? How are you talking about it to your various stakeholders? Are you doing it publicly? Are you in social media? Are you continuing to be very visible with your messaging? Remember, the more people who see and understand who you are and what you do, the more likely you are to get folks who raise their hand and say, I have some interest. Are you letting them know that you're looking for volunteers and board members during this pandemic? Identifying those folks in, who sort of sit within the various places in and around your organization. Who's a passionary? Who's got passion for the mission of your organization? And how are you taking advantage of that in terms of recruiting those folks as volunteers and board members? Are you utilizing your own network of people to identify names and seek people to actually reach out and bring in folks through referrals? So again, this idea, the more you're talking and sharing with others, the more likely you will be to get folks interested as volunteers and board members. And then the last thing I'll suggest before we open it up for any other suggestions is, remember, take advantage right now of the virtual communication that has become so universal in this new world that we're living in. So are you using Zoom meetings like this to connect with people, to bring them together, to have these conversations, and then again, to let them know that you're actively seeking people to become board members and volunteers during this time? And again, meet them where they're at, do it in a way that helps to connect with those folks and make them feel comfortable. So anybody have any suggestions or thoughts to share here about recruiting volunteers and board members during this new world we're living in? John, seeing anybody?
Not as of yet. I think everybody is pondering that very thought.
Okay. If we don't have anybody, I'm going to go to the second question, which is related to the first one, and that is, what can we do to encourage enthusiasm among our existing board members? So again, just a couple of suggestions here. One, the best way to create and keep the enthusiasm going is to make sure that those board members feel engaged. So in a world right now where people may be feeling disconnected, what can you do to engage them through a variety of different channels? You may want to err on the side of over communicating and bringing, folks together more frequently rather than less, so they continue to feel engaged and clearly a part of your board and your team. Look for opportunities to share stories, share the stories of the positive, of the good, of the wonderful mission impact that you still are able to make even during these challenging times. And also give yourselves permission as a team, a leadership team, a board, and a staff to celebrate. Don't forget that there are always opportunities to celebrate, even when you feel like you may not be able to celebrate. That helps with keeping folks enthused, engaged, and interested. So I'll stop there and see, again, does anybody have anything of interest that you'd like to share with the rest of the team?
We have Julie Leach. If you would go ahead and come off mute.
Hi. Yeah, so we have monthly board meetings usually, and we've continued to do those on Zoom. We usually take the month of July off, but even so, I do a weekly email to the board and try and include some visuals with it. So like this week, we started our Stage of Discovery program, and I sent them an email of some of the class activities, even though they're on Zoom doing screenshots and things. So just keep them fully informed with what we're doing.
Great. That's a great idea, Julie. So thank you for sharing that. Again, it falls into the camp of, sharing and communicating. And when you can do that on an ongoing basis, again, it does help keep folks engaged and interested and enthused. Anybody else have something they'd like to share before we move on?
There's a couple other people with hands raised, but I'm going to ask them to put it into chat. We need to move on in the interest of time.
Okay. Thanks, John. Well, let's keep moving. We're going to move into the area called mission focus, and I'll start with the first question there. So the question was, how do top performing organizations and their boards keep mission at the forefront of their work? How do they keep mission at the forefront of their work? So a couple of suggestions here and thoughts. To keep mission at the forefront of your work, organizations really have to make sure and make a conscientious effort to be talking about their mission ongoing. So sometimes when we're distracted, sometimes as we're looking through these cope and adapt state, we find ourselves perhaps distracted. We get drawn into other conversations. So do your best to keep yourself squarely focused on the mission of your organization. Do your best through every conversation and every meeting that you have to make sure that mission is on the agenda for that conversation and for that meeting. Make sure that you come back to or ground everybody in mission before the discussion and conversation even ensues. Tell the stories of the mission impact that your organization is continuing to make. the stories about people, the difference that you're making as an organization, even during these challenging times. But bring it back to the people, bring it back to those who ultimately are the beneficiaries of your mission, and talk about it. Because again, by so doing, you'll give everybody that constant reminder of what this is all about. So I'll stop there just to see if anybody else has any suggestions about what you're doing in terms of keeping mission at the forefront of those conversations, either with your board or with other key stakeholders. Anything to share here, John?
Not yet. Not yet.
Okay.
We do have a comment from Sarah in the chat that talks about having advisory committee members for Valerie's House, and to keep them engaged, they're having monthly Zoom meetings.
Good.
And then soliciting ideas, feedback, and insight so they feel important and involved to remain a part of the organization.
Good. Okay. Well, again, mission will stay at the forefront of conversations if you intentionally make it a part of every conversation. And one thing we do like to just reinforce here is that make sure that everybody is 100% clear about the mission of your organization. In fact, after last week's webinar, we got a comment or two from folks just saying that last week's discussion in the webinar was a good reminder to revisit mission, talk about it, make sure it's still 100% relevant to the organization, and if there's any need to take the mission and start to think about where it might go from here as we are in kind of this new world that we're living in. Somebody also noted after the webinar that they do a mission moment at every board meeting. And I don't know if the individual or the organization who made that comment after the webinar is here and you want to comment on that, but a mission moment is a good idea. Let's keep going. So another question, a good question, is how would you stay mission focused when your organization is financially stretched during these times? So this is related to the last question, but I think the one thing that we would add here is this is where it's incumbent on kind of having the rigor and the discipline that we started to talk about during the first webinar. So truly being intentional about understanding your various programs, your services, and your products within your organization. Knowing what their mission impact is. So not just to say, are they mission aligned, but what is their mission impact? What are they contributing in terms of real impact towards the reason your organization exists? And then also something we'll talk about on next week's webinar is what's the economic impact of that program, that service, or that product? And then really trying to merge those two together to say, look, we're financially strapped. We've got to make some tough decisions. So what do we keep? What do we pivot? What do we change? And what do we have to set aside? Or maybe even hand off to another organization that might be doing it better. So that's, again, rigor, discipline, and really starting to apply that understanding for your programs, products, and services as you move things forward. John, did anybody have any questions or comments that they wanted to share as part of this one?
It looks like Rick Yocum had a comment to share, and I just want to make sure that everyone knows that even though we can't address everyone who's raising their hand throughout this, that your opinion and your thoughts are absolutely valued, as are your questions. So please do put those in the chat box or follow up with us offline so we can make sure those get answered for you.
Okay, good. Well, why don't we keep moving? Larry, I'm going to pass it off to you to share another mission-focused question.
The question that we got was around measurement. So essential for the mission and economics of your nonprofit organization is an understanding of the community's valuation. So the community's valuation of your importance. value that your organization is impacting in the community that you're trying to reach. What are reliable ways to assess that? And it gets back to something Mike just said, and which we focused on at last week's webinar, is did you set mission goals for yourself for the year? So if you did, are you measuring those mission goals against your programs, products, and services? And how are you sharing that information? So getting back to communications again. If you know, I see Mike and Gabrielle smiling at each other. I hope I can use you guys as an example. So if they said they were going to build 25 houses and they built 26 houses, they met their mission goal, and how are they sharing that and communicating that in the community? So that's one way. And then what kind of response are they getting back from the community against those goals that they set? So you don't have to respond, Mike and Gabrielle, but just using that as an example, set mission goals along with your budget, measure your mission goals, and communicate those outcomes. It's really important to gather that input from the community. So any thoughts beyond that, John?
No, not at this time.
Okay. I'll move on to one more mission-focused question, which is, how will this process, so the process we're going through with you, impact your organization and optimize that impact? Well, we believe that just having these conversations is helping you. If you do the homework, it's going to help you because it makes you think about how can we keep mission front and center. And as Mike said on our next webinar, we'll focus on the financial impact and then bringing both of those together. So that should provide you some additional information that you as a leadership team, as a staff, volunteers, and especially with your board, can take a step back and say, you know, are we doing what we should be doing? Are we making the right decisions as we move forward? And how is this going to maybe change our future just a bit? And let's plan for it. Another way that we'll be able to help is some of you, hopefully will move forward with us and we'll work with you one-on-one and we'll dive a little bit deeper into your agencies and organizations and help you through some of that process if you need some help. So that's a little bit about, I guess, how we're going to strengthen or help strengthen your organization. Mike, anything to add to that?
No,
Okay.
I think that's great.
Good. Why don't we move on to the next category, which is communications, and I'll turn it back over to Mike.
So we did have a number of questions that came out of webinar number 1, just related to communications. And we've been talking quite a bit about communications that we've woven into the conversation thus far today. But it's worth just sharing the spirit of these questions and highlighting a couple of points. So one question was, how can we communicate with our stakeholders about our new innovations, programs, products, services that are emerging without seeming indifferent to the pandemic? And the second question, which is related, is how can we communicate with our stakeholders about our programs, services, products that have been put on hold or pivoted during the pandemic, and how often should we reach out to folks with information? So without repeating some of the other things that we said earlier, just a couple of suggestions here that essentially would, we have found that it's a good thing to underscore those things that you're doing to innovate within your organization and to share them broadly with your stakeholders. Because again, if it's a secret and you're not sharing it with others, then they won't know. And more importantly, people actually do want to know what your organizations are up to during this period where it would seem as though many things are on hold. So if you are innovating, if you are doing things differently, if you are pivoting, if you're starting to offer new and different ways to reach out to your various audiences or stakeholders, share that. They will appreciate it, and they will oftentimes reach out to you if there is something of interest to them. An example, so one of the organizations we work with is the Visual Arts Center of Punta Gorda, Well, they did make a number of pivots. They made a number of changes. They made a number of innovations along the way, some early on and some as they've been going. And they've been one of those organizations that's been very visible in terms of all the changes that they're making. And it has, as they've sent out e-blasts, as they've been posting on social media, as they've been putting updates onto their website, all these various forms of communication are working to show that this is an organization that is changing to adapt with the times. And their stakeholders appreciate that, and they've had quite a bit of positive feedback as a result of it. So again, share that as an example. And for any of you who are interested, you can certainly go and look at their social media, at their website, and subscribe to their emails just to see what they're up to. Again, Visual Arts Center of Punta Gorda as the example. In the interest of time, I think we'll move on to the next category. But again, if there's anything of interest that you would like to share about how you're communicating, please type that into the chat box and we will capture it and share that as well. Larry, should we go on to capacity building?
Yeah, I'm just wondering, we just have a few minutes left in the session, and there might be some questions that the group has that they're just dying to ask right now. So I'm just wondering if we just take a few minutes and take some questions from the group prior to wrapping it up. So it might be a good change in our agenda. Anybody have any burning questions? Raise your hand and we'll let you ask it.
If not, Larry, I suggest we ask that capacity building question and then we move to close with, kind of next steps. Because I think that capacity building question is a good one.
John,
do you want to share that?
Sure. John, any questions first?
There's no hands raised at the moment, so maybe go on to the capacity building question.
Sure. So the question is, what if an existing program, service, product is not producing strong results because it's underutilized or conducted without a strong strategy to be productive? Can that still be elevated for action? But with the caveat, strong planning and goal setting, ? So just in a nutshell, this is really the work that Mike and I do. We help organizations think through what are their programs, products, and services that could be elevated, or in some cases, they might have to pivot and either be put on hold or moved out of the organization. And maybe there's a partner out there who would assume that. But it's really looking at the financial viability of whatever that product, program, and service is, and is it mission impact? So it's getting back to that mission alignment and making sure that whatever it is you're considering, is it mission aligned? And is there financial resources to either support delivering the service, or is somebody going to purchase it from the outside? So both of those, mission alignment and can it be financially supported? And if so, then that caveat of doing planning around it and having just excellent execution, which we call a business plan, is absolutely critical. So I'll stop there. And is there anybody that we have worked with that wants to respond to that, or anybody have a different thought?
The only thing I'll add to that, Larry, is, and again, this is an important nuance, but mission aligned, yes. Mission impact, yes. And then economic impact, yes. Right. So the idea that we're sort of making the assumption that most or much of what each organization has is mission aligned, but is it making an impact in terms of delivering that mission?
Right.
Absolutely. And Mike, we have a comment from Joan Geyer. But before you share, I do want to ask everybody if before we depart today, if we could all turn our video on and smile big so we can capture for posterity the world's first ever Webversation. That would be awesome. So Joan, I'll let you go ahead now. Thank you so much for patience.
Yes, I just wanted to share that one of our portions of our program at the Academy at Glengary is transitional employment. It's a part-time employment program. Well, obviously right now, many of those employment jobs are not happening because of COVID. Some still are. We're keeping them in the future, but we've worked even harder with our employment partners to keep that relationship going during COVID so that when people are able to go back to work, we still have the relationship with the employer.
Great. But yeah, there's a lot of examples out there of programs that are pivoting right now. And it, just as Mike said, think about those three things: the finances, the mission, and the mission impact as you're making those decisions. Maybe I will move into next steps and wrap up. Any last questions before we do that?
Well, let's just have everybody smile real quick so we can get a picture for posterity. Smile a little bit longer than you think is comfortable, because I'm terrible at this, so I want to get a couple of good shots.
And there's a few
All right.
screens, so keep
Right.
smiling.
You have to move the screen.
Yeah. Adventures in technology.
That's right.
Very cool. Thank you so much, guys.
All right. If you have additional questions, let me start there. Please forward those to Mike and I, and we'd be happy to respond to those in writing to you. There was a few questions that we didn't get to, and we'll get that information out. So join us for next week's webinar. We'll be diving into financial decision-making and then bringing mission and financial-centric decision-making together and talking about the best approach or one approach as you're moving forward. So many of you have already registered. We have like 40-something registrations already for next week. You will get a registration again for those that haven't registered. You'll get that tomorrow. Josephine will be sending that out. You need to register because you'll be getting a Zoom link for that. So please go ahead and do that. We're excited about next week and sharing some information with you. The other thing is keep meeting as a team. Look at the homework assignments we gave you last week, and hopefully during these 2-week spans between the two webinars, you're getting together, you're talking about decisions that you've made, and you're thinking about how you're measuring your mission impact right now. It's really important to have those discussions, and it will help prepare you for next week's discussion. As Mike said, we're adding a second Webversation on the 29th. Mark that on your calendar, the 29th of July from 11 to 12 Eastern time. And at that time, we'll be sharing a little bit about the work that we'll be doing with those that move forward with us. We'll talk about some criteria that we would like in place to make those decisions and answer any questions you might have about how you become one of those organizations, if you want to become one of those organizations that we're working with. So that's what the 29th will be about, is moving forward with us. All right.
Larry, if I can interject for one moment, just to let folks know, if you missed the webinar #1 last week and would like to look at it, it was recorded and it is on the Patterson Foundation website. And I believe that in the e-blast that was sent out following the webinar, Josephine, correct me if I'm wrong, there was a link to it as well. Also, the assignments that we gave, they are in writing. So if you don't have those, they can also be accessed in the e-blast that was sent out following webinar #1. If you don't have it and you need that, contact Josephine Eisenberg and she'll be happy to send that to you. And I believe it will be up, if it's not up already, on the Patterson Foundation website under the Advancing Mission Thrivability section. Stacy Sternberg at the Patterson Foundation, correct me if I'm wrong. Did I say something that's true or not true?
I was actually looking at Twitter, so I...
Okay. Well, no, the question was the homework assignments, the physical worksheets, are they up on the Patterson Foundation website, or can they be?
They can be. I don't think I've gotten them yet.
Okay.
But, yeah,
all right.
for sure.
And then, let me interject. Not everyone received the link to the video from last week. Those who participated did not receive that link. So it is on the website, the Patterson Foundation website. And if you need it and you can't find it, certainly just email me and I'll send it right over.
Yeah, and I can also share that if you go to the Margin Mission Ignition page on the website, on the bottom section, there's a See More Videos, And if you click on that, it will be in the video page.
There might be some individuals in your organizations that would like to look at it, catch them up a little bit on the process that you're going through with us. So with that, we will close today and wave goodbye to everybody. Hopefully we'll see you next week at the webinar, and please register if you haven't. All right. Thanks,
you. Everybody. We appreciate
Thanks, everybody, for joining.
Take care. We'll see you next week.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.